Board of Alders notice New Haven. The Legislation Committee of the Board of Alders will meet in person on Monday, July 18th, 2022 at 6 o'clock p.m. in the Board of Alders chamber located at 165 Church Street, 2nd floor, New Haven, Connecticut, to hear and act on following items. 1 OR-2022-0018. Ordinance amendment of the New Haven Board of Alders, amending the New Haven Code of Ordinances regarding parking, stopping and standing, parking of oversized vehicles. 2 OR-2022-0017. Ordinance amendment of the New Haven Board of Alders, amending the New Haven Code of Ordinances regarding the Fair Rent Commission and Tenants Union. Per order, Honorable Charles Decker, Chair, attest Honorable Michael Smart, City Clerk. These items are on file and available at the office of the City Clerk, room 202 at 200 Orange Street, New Haven, Connecticut, 06510. For accessibility related accommodations, please call 203-946-7651 voice or 203-946-8582 TTY TPP. Public comment or testimony may also be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavencity.gov before 2 o'clock p.m. on the day of the meeting. This meeting may be viewed on the New Haven Board of Alders YouTube page located here, https://www.youtube.com/panel/ oh boy, UCL3HV9XZ-WE7XK3VQEU8QXG. So I hope all of you got that. Good evening, colleagues. Good evening, everyone here in attendance. We'll get started in just a moment with our 2 items. We'll take them in the order that they are on the agenda. Before we get started, I'll ask members of this committee to introduce themselves, starting with my vice chair.
Richard Furlow, Ward 27.
And my son, Ward 29. Jeanette Morrison, Ward 22.
And I'm Charles Decker, Ward 9. So let's get started this evening with the first item on our agenda, OR-2022, the ordinance amendments regarding parking, stopping, and standing, parking of oversized vehicles. I believe we have city officials who will present on this item. You may proceed when ready. Use the mic. Name and address for the record.
Rebecca Bombero, 122 West Route Ave, New Haven, Connecticut, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, Office of Chief Administrator.
Sandeep Aizula, 151 Maxfield Street, New Haven, 0651, Director of Transportation, Traffic and Parking.
Ready when you are.
So as many of you may have heard from constituents, there's been a lot of recent complaints as it relates to oversized vehicles parked in our neighborhoods. Wanted to take the opportunity to clarify our ordinances because dealing with those complaints, we realized there were 2 weaknesses in the ordinance. One, it was not explicitly clear that those vehicles were not allowed in park and cemetery zones. And we are seeing a lot of the behavior adjacent to those areas. I know Alder Furlow, you've seen that over at Joel Street. Alder Rochelle, you've seen it a lot as it relates to Edward Park. These are tractor trailer trucks that are parking adjacent to our neighborhoods and our housing and schools to create a hazard. And second, as we look closer at the ordinance, it was written in the 70s and it was written based on the tow capacity of a vehicle. And now as we look at that, a Honda Civic actually would qualify under the previous definition. So we used the opportunity to update the definition to something that was pretty straightforward and easy to understand based on sizes. And the sizes were determined based on some of our other conditions. So the height at 20, the length at 20 feet is the length of a standard parking space. The height at 12 feet is the standard roadside clearance for our trees. And the width at 8 feet is the standard width of a parking space. So you see in the packet before you, the zoning map that actually shows you some of those areas where our cemeteries and parks are directly adjacent to our residential zones. The zones, the line goes down the middle of the street. So you might have a large tractor trailer parked on Chapel Street across from a number of houses as a result of this. Shadow line down Port Avenue. It's a problem that's occurring throughout the city. Again, the next slide shows you those that existing Honda Civic towing so that its capacity exceeds the 1,000 pounds, which is a half a ton. So the proposed again is quite clear. That tractor trailer truck you see there is actually parked outside the school, which is another place we're seeing it frequently. In fact, it's a different tractor trailer truck almost every day. And then again, that dimension comparison. And then the City Plan Commission asked that we show some examples. So this is just a infographic we pulled based on federal highway standard classifications. So you can see those non-commercial type of vehicles, those larger box trucks, tow trucks, lift trucks. You know, it's not trying to catch, you know, Mr. Smith's van that he has painted on the side of it for plumbing that he also uses for personal use. This is really intended to capture those commercial vehicles that are owned by businesses that are parking in our residential neighborhoods. So happy to answer any questions. Hold on, let me turn it over to Paul.
Director Isola, before you proceed, I want to recognize Alder Frank Douglas who's here with us as well. Proceed.
So I think Becky Bomber captured most of the issues around this tractor trailer problem. So as you can see in the last illustration, essentially it is meant to sort of kind of issue violations to trucks that are larger than a typical pickup truck. And this is where I think this ordinance clarifies some of those gaps in the existing one.
Thank you for that concise presentation. And at this point, I'll ask if members of this committee have any questions about this item. Alderman Morrison.
Yes, just a quick question in regards to enforcement. So we make a lot of these, changes, and because in the communities you do see like these oversized trucks and different things. But the enforcement, how are we going to really sway people to not do this? Because I know of, I say in my ward, maybe in my ward, somewhere, a lot of places even I will see those big tractor trailer trucks, like just the front half of it, parking, right on the sidewalk, things of that sort. But again, enforcement, because I have other in my ward parking issues, and we can't get anyone to come out to give tickets, tow, anything like that. So what are the plans around enforcement?
So typically these kind of issues, since they're spread out all over this, around the city on the outer edges, we basically rely on someone to call us so that we can have enforcement out there. So we've done that in the past based on all the follows requests. And typically what happens is these trucks, as you observe, they usually just have the trailer present or the truck present. So unfortunately, we couldn't do any enforcement around these areas, partly because there's one way you could normally do it. They do a 72-hour, enforcement. And we've noticed that these vehicles sort of move from that spot that they are parked on when you do the 72-hour timing. That is one thing, unfortunately, we couldn't do in these cases. Sometimes the tractor trailer would be missing, or the trucks would be gone, but the trailer would be there, or vice versa. So typically, to answer your question, we get few calls from either residents or we get a call from the owner, an email, and we send parking enforcement staff out. If we don't have the capacity to tow, we not typically agree to get them, and then we have a towing list, and we, based on the towing list, which is MHPD approved, we actually call the tow company to actually tow these, trailers or trucks.
So when you say that people call you guys, most residents don't know what department you work in, the first thing people, they call the police, and unfortunately, they're not available that often. So that's why I was saying enforcement, because the first thing you do think about are police, but then you do have your traffic people, but at the same time, there's not enough of anyone in any one department. So I just was wondering how you're really gonna, do the enforcement, and what does that look like? Is it just towing? And like one of the things you said, that you could do the 72-hour notice, which I think is always a good way, because you educating people and you're giving them a chance, but at the same time, after that, there's some people in 72 hours, they don't pay any attention because there's no consequence.
So this we observed during COVID, a lot of continuous violations, but we actually work with NHPD to sort of tow these trucks, especially if we don't have the capacity or the resources. If this ordinance is passed, we will, keep monitoring these situations around these areas, parks, and cemeteries, and start issuing violations, because now we have a legal mechanism to, do something about it. And then we'll keep monitoring these things and continuously, one of the things we could do is we could have some targeted staff regularly, patrol these areas for to enforce some of these violations. That's one thing beyond just getting few calls.
Last question, Walter. I guess I still don't have my answer in regards to your average Joe. Your average Joe is going to call 911, and unfortunately, 911 sometimes the communication is not the best, and so people feel as though that they're just crawling into a bottomless pit. So I just want to truly know, how are you going to do it, and if it's something outside of calling 911, what are your plans to let the community know this is where you call or go when you have these website trust in your community?
So my straight answer to that would be, I'll be happy to work with you, with all the owners, to provide some information on what are the numbers they can call during what times of the day. Because you're right, to your point, a lot of people call the 911 number, and on our website, it's clearly listed. You sometimes have to call the non-emergency police number outside of our work hours, which is usually Sundays or Saturday nights or weekday evenings. Happy to share that with all this, send out and put it on our website. We already have it on the website, but put it on our Twitter page and other locations. But that's one way we can actually, spread the word. The other thing we can also do is do some flyers around, working with community teams to provide some information on what are the numbers they should call, who should they call in the morning, evening, and evening.
And just to note, calls to the police is actually how I ended up here at the table today with TTNP. It was a concern the police department was hearing regularly from residents and neighborhood quality of life concerns because of the sightline hazards as it related to these vehicles parked. They are all deputized to write tickets. Obviously, it's not necessarily something that is going to be dispatched to, but especially our district managers, they have an eye out for these things. And they understand that it is a concern of a number of our residents.
My last comment, I kind of look at this topic as like a noise issue. You have a noise issue when you're calling somebody to please help me. calm these people down and you feel like you're not getting any kind of support. I just don't want people to feel like we're just here doing stuff and it's not gonna really have any teeth to make, you know, a whole life within the community. So thank you, Father. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Morrison. Questions from the committee? Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll speak loud. Can you hear me? If I use this tone? Still want me to use a microphone? Okay. Yeah, I'm still not wanting to touch things. Okay. I just want like to thank you for working on this. And I personally thank you. And my community is going to thank you should this pass. Just want to get my head around the fines. What is so if a vehicle is towed, they will incur the towing fee and a ticket from the city.
Yeah.
And so I imagine the towing fee for a truck is going to be quite substantial.
I don't have that information with me.
The towing fee is
Yeah.
set by Connecticut state statute.
Yep. And I
The
did see it. I just want to on the record.
the penalty is already set by ordinance,
Mhm.
so we're not updating that penalty. We're just changing the definition to reflect the new definition in this update on ordinance. So it's $100 penalty.
Okay, and then I'm hearing a little word that you should use the microphone.
Sorry. So the tow fees are set by Connecticut state statute. So that would not be here in the ordinance. The ordinance already exists, so this is not amending the penalty, which is already set. It's just updating the definition. So that penalty will remain $100 per violation.
Okay, I think I saw something close to $1,000 when I looked through it for towing for a large truck. My second thing is just to kind of bounce back from my colleague of the 22nd Ward. The police don't tow for 72 hours, but that's not the same as TTP, right?
So we do the 72-hour time.
Oh, you do also 72
We
hours?
do, yeah, we send out staff to sort of start doing the clocking for 72 hours. And they go back 3 days later to see if the truck is possible.
Just as a question, follow-up question, is that by our ordinance or is that by your policy?
That is another one of the sections of the ordinance. So think about it in terms of you're on vacation. So it gives you the time to leave your car parked outside of your house when you're on vacation, but it doesn't allow, somebody to abandon a vehicle on the street in front of somebody's house or illegally park a commercial vehicle for storage outside of somebody's house.
Okay, yeah, I got a little bit, I thought it was 48 hours. I thought the turnaround was 48 hours.
It is 72 hours.
72. So then a large commercial truck can park for 72 hours, 3 days before it's ticketed and then possibly towed.
This is clarifying that they're not allowed to park in residential, cemetery, or park zones at all. Except for in the incidental use to performing business. So say you're getting a refrigerator from Lowe's, your delivery man has the opportunity to park outside your house and deliver your refrigerator.
If a truck is parked where it shouldn't be parked, how long will it be before that truck is towed?
If based in a residential neighborhood, they're not allowed to park unless they're performing their business. Right now in the cemetery park zone, they can park as long as they can park. There's no rules around no parking, but we can still enforce a 72-hour time of violation.
So this will update and move cemeteries and parks so that they're treated like residential zones.
You got some work to do. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman. Further questions from members of the committee? Alderman Archon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our city staff for working on this. This is my second fight now since we have quite a discussion about it in the city planning commission last month. I know in our packets that there's a red line version of this resolution. It looks to me that this version includes changes since the resolution was submitted. It seems to be reflecting some of the advice that was given at the commission.
I think that is the one that it was
Could
part
you please use my?
sorry. I think that's the one that was part of the city plan report. I did send to aldermanic staff our suggestions based on those recommendations, which is far less redlining. It integrates some of those, but still keeps it in the more simpler form, as per our conversations with the
Okay. So, but that's not this.
correct. No.
This is the version that city plan staff revised and provided to us. Something to consider.
Correct.
Neither this version nor the one that you sent us as well as the version submitted to this file.
I don't know if the one we originally submitted is still in your packet, but
It's not in our packet.
Okay.
The point I'm making is that we would have to, either which way we go, we would have to amend by substitution and all. Okay. All right, so we'll deal with that later. I want to thank you for the work. I can only tell you what I'm seeing here, which is what was put in our packet. I think you sent an email today with something else, but I don't know if that made it into our packet. So I'm commenting on this area here.
hold that one open then.
And it uses 4 verbs. Money works in any sentence, and certainly in any ordinance is a verb, right? It's not interpretation, it's not put down, it's a verb. And the verb here is stand, stop, or leave. That's where it's used in some places, and park. So it seems to me like those 2 options are used interchangeably, just looking at this for stand, stop, or leave, and another place is park. And I assume that those are verbs that are defined in Connecticut general statutes. And defined in any of them. Is that correct?
So like,
Please,
thank you for the reminder. We're not sharing anymore, so I'll just hold it close. The city plan version suggested updating 2 sections of our ordinances, one which is standing and stopping, and the other which is parking. We're recommending that this is an update to the parking regulation only. The standing and stopping is limited to the places you wouldn't want anybody to even pause. So a crosswalk or an intersection. But we are not suggesting updating that portion of the traffic and parking ordinance. However, that is the title of the overall section. So that's why it is still the title of this piece of legislation.
Okay, so the version that you sent to us, which I don't remember, you use the word park.
Correct.
And that's the only verb you use to
Correct.
describe what's happening to the vehicle that's illegal.
Correct.
In these places.
Correct.
Park. Okay, great. Okay, I'm looking at the definition. And so, okay, we'll just look at the key language, which you can tell me if it's also in yours. It is, gosh, it's hard to follow, but it's section 3. No operator shall stop, stand, or leave any large truck. So stop, stand, or leave, they're obviously, let's go to the other one. Let me go to the other one. Article 4, section 30, parking large trucks. That's the section you propose to amend. Okay.
Correct.
In accordance with Title 3, Chapter 21, Article 3, Division 1, Section 21-63, General Ordinance, entitled, etc. No person having the custody and control of a truck, oversized vehicle, tractor trailer unit, or truck tractor shall be permitted to park on any street in a residential park cemetery district at any time of day or night. However, that's except for when they're in the performance of the function, right? So that sounds like what we submitted.
Except for instead of using a definition section, we are just in that portion of the ordinance, as we discussed, establishing those standards of what an oversized vehicle is. So in excess of 20 feet in length, in excess of 12 feet in height, or in excess of 8 feet in length.
Okay, so this one says a large truck, oversized vehicle, tractor trailer unit, or truck tractor. You don't go through that list of vehicle types. You just said, what, any vehicle over those dimensions?
Correct.
Okay. But your ordinance amendment also updates those definitions too, right? Or does? No? Okay, well, that narrows down the focus considerably. I think Mr. Lewis just left, perhaps he's bringing us the actual version of this.
And I
ordinance amendment
apologize,
That you would like us to consider.
Yeah, we assumed it would be part of your packet. We
Okay.
only brought our copies as a result.
All right. No person having custody and control of a vehicle or vehicles weighing in excess of 10,000 pounds or with dimensions exceeding any of the following: 20 feet in length, 12 feet in height, or 8 feet in width shall be permitted to park, et cetera, et cetera. So there's two criteria. A vehicle that weighs over 10,000 pounds, or a vehicle with dimensions exceeding any of the following. I mean, it could be just in excess of one, not 2 or 3 or 3 or 3. So that's 20 feet in length, or 12 feet in height, or 8 feet in width. So this is broader because the version, thank you for that. The version that was in our packets actually says the type of vehicles. But that doesn't give the type of vehicle. So it seems that it would apply to school buses, other city vehicles, not just trucks, right? It doesn't say what type of truck. You could have a recreational vehicle, right? Your ordinance amendment would make it illegal for someone to park their RV. Is that right?
Correct, because it creates a sightline hazard.
Okay, great. All right. So there's other questions I was going to ask, which are now moot, unless we decide in our deliberation to adopt the sensitive plan staff recommendations. Okay, so it doesn't matter what type of vehicle, it's just about size.
And then a school bus, it would be incidental to performing the service of school bus. So like a school bus couldn't park on your neighborhood street overnight, but it can pick up kids and drop kids off.
Right. Right, sometimes school bus drivers park next to every park in there for a while because we get really late for when they're supposed to pick up kids. So maybe that would be the interpretation. Okay. All right, doesn't matter what kind of vehicles, it's just about, so 10,000 pounds. This is one of the things that came up in the city planning. Sometimes there are private residents who own large pickup trucks because they're contractors, right? They're masons or carpenters, plumbers, and they need lots of room, and they might also tow something. So if you own an F-250 or even an F-350, some of those can be pretty darn heavy. And this was a question I had for you earlier. So are those trucks, sometimes with combination plates, sometimes not, but a private per people's trucks, could some of those be big enough to violate this?
And if you look to the final slide there, they would fall within the federal highway classification 4.
Okay, I'm looking.
4 and 5,
4 and 5.
depending on
Well, box trucks and delivery trucks. So that would be 5 most. That is a pickup truck without a bed.
So 4 is more like a U-Haul.
Yes.
5 is like a very large pickup truck, the one you mentioned, F-350.
Between 16,001 to 19,500 pounds. So the class 5 is heavier than your ordinance. You said 10,000. According to this, that is 6,000, between 6,000 and 9,500 pounds less than class 5. So it's not exactly a class 5 vehicle like we're talking about here. A big pickup. Or let's say somebody has a pickup with huge shocks and lifters and everything on it. They got, some truck up there and small battery. Could some of those trucks be taller than the maximum height, 12 feet there?
I am not sure, but I think it is. Let's see.
Okay. Okay, I'm not venturing an opinion about this just at the moment, but I do think, like, if you look at people's pickup trucks, they've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we just need to be clear if we in fact want to outlaw people who own these big pickup trucks from parking them on the street. Maybe we do, but we shouldn't. We should just know that. All right. And I see that, Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, and I'll yield to the moment statement.
Although just to clarify, so for example, a big F-350 really would fall, F-250 probably would fall in class 5. 350 is a very large truck. And it falls somewhere, I looked at it, I think it falls somewhere close to a class 7. And it comes to around 30,000 pounds, it's very small. And, you know, so the intent is basically to
Okay, so your ordinance amendment has that 10,000 pound threshold capacity, 20 feet long, or 8 feet wide, or 12 feet tall threshold. So any one of those four, if you tip the scale, so to speak, from the statement or any of those four things, it's out of compliance, subject to be ticketed. So it doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter what configuration of vehicle it is. It could be a pickup truck, it could be a recreational vehicle, it could be somebody who owns a bus.
And the driving force behind that is, you know, making sure that these vehicles are not encroaching into the right of way, you know, narrowing our streets down where it's difficult to pass, that they're not hitting and taking out the trees and wires, and that they're not taking up multiple spots in the neighborhood.
And there's nothing in your proposed ordinance that is parking on someone's private property.
Correct.
The city plan staff thought that should be considered, but that's not what. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alder. That raises one question that I had, which is, this may be a naive question. I'm not a specialist, but why bring waiving to this at all? I mean, I think the issue is just like the space that the vehicle takes up.
We toyed back and forth with that. I think, or we're indifferent as to whether it remains or not. But it is one of the main guiding forces in the Federal Highway Administration's classification of vehicles.
So there's some efficiency there. Okay. Thank you. Other questions from members of the committee? Alder Hurlitz.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'm not ready to consider this evening, but could you, through you, Mr. Chair, if we can get a copy of this one digitally, because I can't see it. My glasses on, I can't read it. And so through you, if we can get a copy of this, digitally, that would be helpful.
We can try to do that. Thank you. Yeah, no, it seems as if there may be some more work we'll have to do here, but if there are no more questions at this time, I'll John.
Just a quick suggestion, Mr. Chair. The section is entitled parking oversized trucks and residential cars and so then later on in the text of the ordinance, when it refers to residential, we refer to vehicles. And having the type of vehicle in the title, I wonder if that narrows the focus of the type of vehicle that these dimensional standards require, or do we want to change that?
So noted, we were working with existing text and did not have as close an eye to it as we did from the working.
Thank you. Any last questions at this time from the committee? Seeing none, I'll ask if there are any members of the public who wish to be heard on this item. And I thank you both very much and invite you to stick around. I think some more questions may come up. Asking a second time, are there any members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? And a third time, Any members of the public wish to be heard on this item? I know that there was at least some testimony in the city plan hearing. I don't believe we received written testimony on this, not that I've seen in my packet. So seeing members of the public wishing to be heard on this, thank you two again, and we can move on to the second item. on our agenda. OR 2022-0017, the ordinance amendment of the New Haven Board of Alders, amending the New Haven Code of Ordinances regarding the Fair Rent Commission and Tenants Union. Who's going to be presenting on this item from the city? Director Benitez, Public Counsel King. Good evening. When you're ready, you can go ahead and begin your presentation. Just make sure that you speak into the mic, and before you start, please give us your name and address for the record. And don't press any buttons, or it's very confusing. I don't know why they put buttons on here that you're not supposed to touch. I didn't design it. But
All right. Local use Bermudas, 121 Lexington Ave, number 11, apartment 11, New Haven.
And I'll get mine out of the way now too. Patricia King, 32 Mr. Harris.
All right, thank you so much for having us this evening. Am I speaking correctly?
Mhm.
So, okay.
yeah, you can pick it up.
Oh, great. Just wanted to touch any buttons. So we're here today because of the proposed amendment to the Fair Rent Commission ordinance. And the amendment, it would basically recognize and regulate tenants unions. And as you all have seen, there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of media coverage in the last couple of months regarding tenants unions that have been arising throughout the New Haven area and also the greater New Haven area. So there's been a lot of organizing around that. And so we recognize that at the state statute level, tenants unions are mentioned. However, there's no specific process on how a fair rent commission would handle a tenant union complaint. And so while it is mentioned in state statute, we wanted to make sure that we carved out provisions so that the Fair Rent Commission in New Haven would be able to take on the complaints that we're receiving. As of right now, we have received several complaints, over 12 so far. There was a cluster that we received in April of this year, a tenant union complaints, and we wanted to make sure that we addressed it. And so with that, the way that the tenants union amendment would work is to include that a provision to be able to actually recognize the tenants union. And so the way that we would recognize them is by making sure that the majority of the tenants within a complex of 10 units or more are members, become members of a tenants union. So that's one way that we would do that. And if they're not in a complex, then make sure that they have 10 units or more in an adjoining land owned by the same landlord. The other thing is that the way that we would hear the actual complaint through the Fair Rent Commission process, it will be a two-part process. So we're going to be separating how we hear the complaint. So for instance, it's a two-track model. There's the regular track for receiving the complaints. So that's through the informal hearing process, the public hearing, and those are individual complaints. But now we are going to have this separate track so that we can carve out room for an investigatory process with the tenants unions. And so in that investigatory track, we would set up a meeting, a workshop is what we're calling it, between the tenants union members, the tenant union representative, and as well as the landlord. And we want to make sure that we have due process. And as part of that, the investigatory track, we want to allow for, if the tenant union brings it to our attention, for there to be an investigation of, let's say, a common area, we would be able to go out there and we would be able to investigate and create some kind of findings. And so this will all help clarify for the record what's actually going on within the complex. And so beyond that, we want to make sure that all of this, we're doing this for for purposes of being helpful and providing defense against retaliatory evictions for tenants unions, which is something that is now added as well. And for there to be a space created where landlords and tenants can finally come together. If they're, tenants union members, where all parties can address each other. One of the things that we hear consistently is, might not be able to reach out or might not be able to receive a response. If I'm a tenant union member, I just am not hearing back from the landlord. And so we want to address that. And so this entire process will help us build a history and a larger understanding of what's actually happening within these complexes. And so we want both sides at the table, and we want to make sure that we have a well-maintained housing stock and a fair housing stock, of course.
Thank you for that summary. Corporate Counsel, do you have anything to add at this time?
Not at this time. I'm happy to address your questions. I think the important thing to remember here is that the tenants unions have a role in the investigatory process, which the Fair Rent Commission is empowered with under the state statutes. The complaint process, because each individual rental involves a contract between the tenant and a landlord, that still needs to stay on an individual basis because there are really only two parties to that contract. So these are the two parties that have the process. They have to be involved in the formal complaint process. So the role we allocated to the tenants union and what I think they could be most helpful is in the investigatory process and bringing common issues to the attention of the Fair Housing Commission, Fair Rent Commission, sorry, and going through a separate process regarding those investigations.
Thank you. So you're not proposing a wholesale amendment of American contract law at this time?
No.
That's a shame.
Contracts in law school is enough. Thank you very much.
Do any members of the committee have questions on this item? Alder Furlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. It's good to see you both this evening. I'm sorry, Alderman John. My question is, what kind of training will the commission receive in order to implement this should it pass?
So we want to make sure that before this passes, that we're able to have the commissioners obviously vote on the proposed rules and regulations. And right now, that in this moment in time, this is a period where we are open to suggestions. And so certainly before we actually institute this, there will be two types of trainings, not just for the commissioners themselves, but also for the tenants unions in this process. So we want to make sure that it's clear in terms of what are the expectations of being able to register a tenants union, and that it is something that is well defined in terms of the process that we will take, let's say, because we're still going to continue with individual complaints, but when the time comes for, let's say if there's commonalities within shared spaces, maybe something's occurring, for instance, in a basement, and it's a space that's used by everybody within that complex. So we want to make sure that the tenant union members understand what that process is for before we get to have them see the actual commissioners, so that there's a clear understanding and expectation of being able to have the two-track system and have meetings. Again, workshops is what we're referring to them as, between both parties, and that they also understand that there could be designated tenant union representatives. So for the tenant union members, there's going to be a clear indicator and pamphlet along with the training to have them understand what that process is so it won't be confusing.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I know that's probably not within our purview per se, but I think it might be good for us to see those policies and those procedures at some point to give us an idea. We're just dealing with our section, which is the ordinance itself, but I think that would give us an idea of what's going on. Thank you.
So noted. So noted, thank you. Other questions from members of the committee? Alderman Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize if I missed this in your explanation. 10 or more separate units sharing common ownership and located on the same parcel or joint parcel. Those are key elements of the definition of the tenant union. Does that come in statutes or is that a judgment?
That was actually something that after many different meetings, particularly with LCI, it was something that was recommended by the LCI department and came from those meetings that we had previously and those recommendations.
So, and also that the number 10 was as we thought would be the appropriate number for a tenants union. I don't know, Alderman Marshall, if your question went to the question of whether a union could involve people on more than one property, if you will, or one development or complex. So,
That's not what I was asking, but it's an excellent question. So what do you want to address?
So, because we do have to deal with the definition of housing accommodation that is in the ordinance, which basically limits us, I think, to really one property, if you will, or one complex or one development. So we have to work within that as well. And the word accommodation is also used in the statutes. So we have to work within that as well. I mean, I guess, you know, the number, whether 10 is appropriate, I think that's a fair number in terms of getting a sizable unit or not possibly imposing this on possibly landlords of how small developments than 10.
Was it also the recommendation from the LCI representatives to prohibit the union from being formed property that's owner occupied?
Well, so the idea when, you know, as we were talking this through is that let's suppose you have a 3-family and one of those units is owner occupied and 2 of those units you're renting out to the tenants. And so we wanted to make sure that, you know, it was a fair process. So if you had 2 tenants against the one, so we just want to make sure that we created a fair process and that we in our meetings, you know, based on the recommendations of LCI and saying that they recommended the number 10 to begin with. So there were several considerations there of why we didn't start with such a small number.
And I probably should have paid closer attention to the articles that were written about the tenancy and forms, but does the city play a role in overseeing elections for these unions?
No.
How does that happen? When does the city decide that the election is legit?
We do not play a role in the election process of the tenancy union, but we will have a form to be able to officially recognize those numbers, and we want to know who they are, where do they live, what units do they live in within that complex, and then we want to know their information. So we would be pulling that together through an actual form.
One final question, Mr. Chair, I think for you. It says here that a tenancy representative shall be the person designated by the members of the union, etc. Could it be possible for especially if it's a large property, hundreds of units, could it be possible to have more than one representative?
Yes, it actually could be.
Right, so we might want to say the person or persons designated. If it's a big shop, for example, they work for the union, they have plenty of representatives. So a very large property, units, you might be more than one person. Spend enough time to talk to those people, the property owners. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Further questions from the committee? Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank both of you for coming out. I invite two of you to stick around as well, because I know that we had quite a bit of public testimony for this, so there may be further questions that come up after that.
Sure, that's what I was expecting, frankly, so we'll be happy to stay and answer whatever questions you might have or that might come up.
Great, thank you both.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we have several folks signed up to testify this evening, and there's more folks in the gallery, so maybe larger than that. So we will go in the order on the list, and then I'll call for anyone who didn't have a chance to sign up ahead of time. Given the large number of people, and to give everyone down at the bottom of the list a fair chance to, hopefully not have to stay till 11. We're going to limit testimony to we'll call it 4 minutes. Tonight, I'm going to ask my chair to stop watching. Thank you. So first up, we are going to have Mark Furla, who will be followed by Alexander Kolopatron. So Alexander, deputy. Furla.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. So I will say this probably before every testimony, but please speak into the mic and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Mark Furla, 32 Chambers Street, New Haven, Connecticut. I'm speaking tonight as a tenant organizer and one of the co-chairs for the Democratic Socialists of America, BSA, and the Connecticut Tenants Union. We've been working with folks across the state organizing tenant unions. As I'm sure you are all aware, we're in a housing crisis, privatization out of control. And one of the things that is within an individual's control is to act collectively, organize, change their material conditions. And we're seeing some success with that and training folks across the state. I want to commend Commissioner Bermudez, I believe Commissioner's your title, and the city overall for introducing this ordinance. We are there is although tenant unions are recognized by statute and state law, there's a very sort of vague definition, and trying to get folks to deal with the impact is a bit tricky. So having it codified even initially is a really great first step. The state has taken on the role of expanding fair rent commissions across the state. And as I think everybody knows, if we can make it legal in one town, it's legal in every town in Connecticut. And so potentially as fair rent commissions expand out, codifying, recognizing tenant unions as a part of that is potentially, it's a step that would make things a lot easier. There's still a lot of fighting to be done for people's rights and to ensure dignity in their homes. But having the government recognize that is super helpful. So that's great. They aren't labor unions, which I know that many of us here are familiar with. And I wanna, I guess, flag that although this will not be the recognition of a tenant, you can have a tenant union and never use this language. I suspect that this is going to wind up kind of being the de facto definition, or at least allow landlords to be like, oh, well, you're not getting that, right? You didn't do that. So I would encourage this body, just listening to some of the questions earlier, to have as flexible a definition and as open a definition
30 seconds.
for who would be in that, right? A tenants union. One of the things that I suspect we would want to do in New Haven is make sure that people who live in the majority of our housing stock could have access to this. Most of our housing stock probably is way under 10 units. We have lots, thousands and thousands and thousands of multifamily, and that's where our folks live. So I'd want to sort of build that into that. And you know, if we're talking about working collectively, that's my timer. This isn't necessarily something where we would want to get into elections. right? These are sort of more short-term ad hoc groups is what we're seeing. Thank you for doing this. I think it would be great. And I think if we could think about what our housing stock looks like here and have the language be as broad as possible to impact that would be great. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Perla. I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
For you. So you mentioned that number 10 possibly, you know, as one area that might be a little prescriptive. Are there other specific areas that you'd be worried about? You know, I think as you're characterizing landlords sort of having an avenue to not recognize.
In the language as proposed, that's really, I think, the big thing that would sort of raise a flag. Just again, looking at our existing housing stock, and particularly as we've seen a fairly massive consolidation of many smaller properties into what they're managed as one. They are in every way, the rents collected as one. So that would be the one flag. I do think that it's also, I commented government is incredibly important and incredibly boring. It's so exciting. It's like really important that this is a test case. And I think all parties will work through over a year or so, and having the city have guidelines doesn't necessarily prohibit them from doing other things, but it does create some opportunities to have a more formal discussion.
Thank you for that. I just asked because, you know, generally if we are going to move something forward, we just want to make sure that it does what we think it's going to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that.
So thank you for coming down and enjoy the rest of the evening. Alexander Kolokotronis is up now. He'll be followed by Luke. I'm going to butcher this middle name, but Melnicker Harrison. So Luke, if you are here, get prepared. And Mr. Kolokotronis, you'll have 4 minutes once you get started.
Okay. My name is Alexander Kolokotronis. I live in 284 Orange Street, apartment 201. I'm here as a resident of New Haven over 6 years now. I'm here as a tenant, almost lifelong, and also speaking as chapter co-chair of Connecticut Democratic Socialists of America, which Greater New Haven is one of the branches. I echo what Mark Furla stated. Agreed, more than agreed. I think a number of us are aligned on seeing the need for a more inclusive number. But also, I want to add on in stating that as a number of us know, labor unions have been a vehicle for addressing issues in the workplace. When issues were being addressed in the workplace, when issues were flaring up in the workplace a century ago, labor unions were the vehicle for that. And now we're in the midst of a housing crisis. And it's a housing crisis that's marked by a record-setting year for rent increases nationwide. I believe it's almost over 11%. And New Haven County tracks that number almost to the T. And we're seeing the effects of it in larger urban centers and the outflow of people coming in as well. And so as we're sort of grasping for solutions to these issues around how to address housing, how to create housing that is more than just more affordable, but also a new kind of housing that allows for communities to not just stay rooted, but plant further roots. It's likely that, more than likely, I think, from what we've seen from labor unions, just as workers, were the means of addressing or creating the solutions. It'll be tenants who are organized and tenants who are coming together collectively. And so what this is offering, this legislation, what the new ordinances are offering, is a step up in that and a leg up in that. And I think it's really important that we all stand here together to support this moving forward. And I agree, it's a first step, but I think it's a really, really important step. And it's, frankly, I think, cutting edge. I mean, there's not much that we've seen from around the country. There are bits and pieces here and there of examples. And here we have a real opportunity to create something that others will follow suit on. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Kolokotronis? Seeing none. Thank you for coming down and sharing your testimony. Appreciate it. Next up is Luke Melnicker Harrison. will be followed by K, I believe it is. Yeah, just if you're both gonna speak, just make sure you both have a mic and say your name and address for the record, but or all three of you. I see it, but yeah, it's fine to do it together.
Thank you. My name is Luke Melnicker. I live at 35 William Street, apartment 1 in New Haven. Good evening, members of the Legislative Committee. I'm testifying as a New Haven tenant and as a tenant organizer, and I'm testifying in support of the proposed amendments to formally recognize tenant unions and empower them to deal collectively with the Fair Rent Commission. Rent is currently the highest it has ever been. It is breaking records around the country and in Connecticut. The fact that housing, a matter of basic survival, not to mention dignity and well-being, is treated as a playground for real estate speculation, traded back and forth among the wealthy like stock market shares, turned into a business for landlords who want to squeeze as much profit out of tenants as possible, while investing as little into the housing itself as they can, results in our current situation of skyrocketing rents and deteriorating housing stock. You walk around anywhere in town and you see it. Mandy, Pike, Ocean signs all over the place. It feels sometimes to me like Pottersville, if you remember the movie It's a Wonderful Life. It feels like this town is getting completely bought up by mega landlord companies. They're purchasing huge amounts of our city and then letting those apartments fall into disrepair. It doesn't have to be this way. There's no reason that so many New Haven residents should be turning over 30, 40, 50% of their income to investors who usually live in New York or who knows where. That's money that's flowing out of our city to go line the pockets of people who have no investment in the city or the people who live and work here. And it hurts to sort of render so much of your income every month when your apartment is falling down around you. To change this situation, city government must take a more proactive role in taking back the city for the people who actually live here. Tenant unions are about neighbors banding together to protect themselves from increasing rents, retaliatory and negligent landlords. They're about forming stronger and more resilient communities in our neighborhoods. They are truly a measure for protecting and enhancing our democracy, since neighbors coming together to talk about shared problems and brainstorm solutions is the foundation of a functioning democratic society. For me, as a young person, they are also a climate resilience measure. The next time an unnatural natural disaster hits New Haven, I want to know who my neighbors are and who I can turn to for help. Legislators who care about making New Haven a place where regular working people can live and thrive should pass this ordinance enthusiastically. New Haven is a union town in many ways. We know that workers must have the right to organize collectively on the job to improve working conditions. In the same way, we must recognize tenants' right to organize collectively at home to improve living conditions. Tenant unions are an important part of the solution for our housing problems. Legislators should also be seriously grappling with the problem of skyrocketing rents in the city that is pushing so many people out and allowing mega landlords to take over. Legislators should use the Fair Rent Commission to its fullest capacity, seeing it as a tool to protect the people who live here, and should also invest in real long-term solutions like permanently affordable social housing. My last comment is just that the city should fight for New Haven and the people who live, work, and pay rent here, rather than accommodating real estate speculators who have zero interest in New Haven, its people, or its future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mercedes is going to speak in Spanish, and I'm going to translate for her.
Okay.
So we'll go back.
Mi nombre es Mercedes Ramos. Soy parte del grupo que empezó el sindicato de inquilinos en Quinnipiac Garden.
My name is Mercedes Ramos. I'm part of the group that's starting the tenant unions at Quinnipiac Gardens.
como todo ser humano, nosotros queremos vivir bien, con dignidad y seguridad. Pero es difícil obtener una vivienda decente. ¿Por qué?
Like every human being, we want to live well with dignity and security.
And we'll need Mercedes' address for the record as well.
It's 1314 Quinnipiac.
Sorry, go ahead.
Like every human being, we want to live well with dignity and security, but it is difficult to obtain a decent place to live.
Porque en esa vivienda no hacen bien las cosas.
In my living situation, the landlord does not manage it well.
Okay. La renta sigue subiendo y me preocupo porque muchas personas trabajan, tienen que pagar a pulmón y ellos tienen miles que pagar.
The rent keeps going up, and it worries me because even though people work, they cannot afford the rent that keeps going up.
Por eso yo decidí en el sindicato, porque me gusta que todo se vea bien, limpio y que hagan de todo lo que la gente necesite.
I decided to participate in the union at my complex because I wanted to see everything be cleaned up and well taken care of, and for the property to be managed like it should be.
Otros inquilinos deben de formar sindicato también, porque si ellos quieren tener esa ayuda, que se junten en el grupo, mientras el grupo es más grande, más le podemos a los pais.
Other tenants should also form tenants union because the more people get involved, the larger the group is, the more power they can have over Pike or other landlords involved.
Y lo que le quiero decir a mi representante, que nos ayuden en esos eventos.
What I want to say to my elected representatives is that you would help us with this.
Que este muchacho que está aquí fue el que formó ese grupo y por él peleó y estamos ahí en esa reunión y estamos ya, están haciendo las cosas bien.
This young man helped start the group, and since we started doing the tenants meetings, management has started doing things better.
Okay, que Dios te bendiga y te bendiga, pero mucho, mucho, mucho.
God bless you.
Gracias, everybody.
Gracias, Mercedes.
Good evening, Legislative Committee. My name is Kate Pittman. I'm also from 1314 Quinnipiac Ave. I'm one of those people who helped to start Quinnipiac Tenant Garden. I'm here to speak in favor of the tenant union and ask you to vote in our favor of this ordinance that will officially recognize New Haven. I'm from New Haven, Connecticut. My experience is trying to find decent affordable housing in New Haven. That's not, I'm not getting no luck with that. If we fall behind in our rent, the city will send sheriffs to kick us out, and we could end up on the street. But if the landlord fails to do their part, it is hard to get the city to do anything about it. We had to do a lot of work to finally get a response. We formed a union, spoke to other city officials, even protests at City Hall. It is important to tenants to get together and form union. What I want to say to my elected representative is could we get our help with this situation? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all three of you for coming down. Questions for the presenters, the commenters? Seeing none. Thank you again for sharing your experience. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Nick Portinski. Will be followed by Abby Feldman.
Hi, my name is Nick Portinski. I'm here
As a recent resident of New Haven, last year I moved to 66 Norton Street in Edgewood. I came to New Haven to continue my academic training, and I came completely unaware of the sort of circumstances of the rental market, and what I found I could really only describe as a disgrace. That catalyzed my participation in organizing tenant unions with the Connecticut Tenant Union. And so I have been working at 66 Norton for the past several months to organize the tenant union. And so I'm going to just briefly comment on the situation there and how I think we can address that. Coming to 66 Norton, there was a litany of problems that I don't have enough time to get into. But the one that I want to focus on is one that I think emphasizes what it means when we talk about fair rent, which is that when we turned our heaters on, which were these very cheap, poorly installed, inefficient electrical heaters, when we turned them on in the winter, people's electrical bills started to skyrocket. There were tenants who had thousands of dollars in electrical bills in a single month to barely heat their homes. And the point that I want to make by bringing that up is to say that rent can't ever really be fair if you have to choose between paying your rent or paying your heating bill. And I also want to mention that this was in an ostensibly, affordable apartment complex, but it's no longer affordable if you're paying $2,400 in the month of January to heat your home. The landlord and the property management refused to do anything about this. If anything, they were resilient to acknowledge that it was even a problem. They essentially gaslit the tenants and told them that they didn't know how to use the thermostats, which is a joke, of course. And so tenant unions offer a viable solution to that problem. They can individually ignore tenants and write them off and tell them that they don't know how to work their heater. But when tenants are organized, and specifically when tenants have the support of the city in that organization, they're a lot stronger and they have a lot more power to negotiate these kinds of problems with their landlords. And so, yeah, I think that that's really the point that I want to make today and why I would urge this body to support the amendment and continue to make New Haven a better place for everyone to live. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us this evening. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you again. Next up is Abby Feldman, who will be followed by Elias Estabrook.
Hi, good evening. My name is Abby Feldman. I live at 33 Exchange Street. I'm the lead organizer with New Haven Rising. As I testified last week, New Haven Rising has recently surveyed over 1,000 people across our city. And the top 3 priorities, once again, that have emerged are affordable housing, youth opportunities, and jobs. We know that the affordable housing crisis is something that cannot be solved with any single policy. Our city must pursue many solutions simultaneously and urgently. In the course of our surveys and in recent public hearings, we have heard many people speak about the fact that they cannot find a place to rent in the city that is affordable. Others are living in fear that with their next lease, a rent increase could push them out of the community. Still, others are living in unsafe and unsanitary spaces because landlords refuse to maintain their properties. There is deep and widespread anger in our city with corporate landlords who now own a large portion of the low-income housing stock and who seem to be unaccountable to their tenants. Tenant unions are part of the solution to this problem. In New Haven Rising, we know that we are stronger together and that challenging powerful individuals requires collective action. Tenant unions provide one way for tenants to share concerns and identify solutions. They can provide resources for the most vulnerable tenants. They should be able to provide representation in forums like the Fair Rent Commission, and they can help our Fair Rent Commissioners be more effective in the vital work that they are undertaking for New Haven. Tenant unions level the playing field, given that landlords are able to hire high-powered lawyers and can bring the resources to bear in challenging low-income residents. We are hopeful that tenant unions will deepen the civic organization in our city and give our residents the tools that they need to fight for affordable housing on a variety of fronts. So we urge the board to pass this item, and we are hopeful that tenants across our city will respond by organizing and fighting for a city that provides everybody with a path to live a dignified life here in New Haven. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for sharing your testimony.
Thank you.
Next up is Elias Estabrook, will be followed by Jennifer DePalma.
Good evening. My name is Elias Estabrook. I live at 380 Winthrop Avenue. I'm testifying tonight in support of the proposed ordinance amendment. I've been a tenant for 8 years in New Haven. I can also remember growing up as a tenant on a street in Somerville, Massachusetts, where landlord owned almost all the property on the street. I'm grateful. I'm in pretty good housing conditions right now, but I recognize that many of my neighbors don't feel that same security. I'm also a commissioner on the Affordable Housing Commission. As a few people have mentioned tonight, we have a challenge in our city with housing units not being maintained as safe and affordable places to live. The Affordable Housing Commission recently reviewed research that some landlords are not sufficiently accountable to our city's housing code. And over the last few years, I've heard numerous stories from neighbors about homes that were not managed well by landlords, or whose rent was raised despite the bad conditions of the unit they were in. I don't think New Haven renters should have to feel afraid or powerless to ask their landlords to be responsible. Tenant unions can provide a way for tenants to work together to address concerns with rent increases and property management. Tenants should be able to join together to have representation. And that representation should be recognized by the city in the fair rent commission process as proposed. I think this amended ordinance could benefit many people in our city. As we heard tonight, maybe there's some fine tuning we have to do around the definition of a tenant union. But 2 out of 3 New Haven residents are tenants, they rent. 34% of rental units are within a structure with 10 or more units. So setting a number of 10 may leave out a number of tenants. But I think that either way, we have a lot of multi-family developments where tenant unions could provide important support for tenants who are sharing the same rent increases and property management problems. So overall, again, in conclusion, I think it's important. This is an important step to make this amendment, this reform, to do right by tenants who choose to form a tenant union. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Estabrook. Next up, we on the list is Jennifer DePalma. And Jennifer DePalma's at the end of our list, so yeah.
Hello.
Good evening.
This is the mic here?
It is. Don't press any buttons, just hold it close to your mouth.
Okay.
And then just give us your name and address for the record. And you may begin.
My name
Bring it
is-
right up, right up there.
My name is Jennifer DePalma, and I am here representing the Blake Street Apartments Tenant Union, and I live at 39 Farnham Avenue, apartment 43. So yeah, I'll just start reading this, otherwise I'll ramble. So I'm a resident of 39 Farnham Ave. It's a apartment complex of, I think, 72 units. And it was recently purchased by Ocean Properties. I've lived there now for 11 years, and on December 31st of 2021, we got notice that our apartment complex had been sold just via letter stuck in the common area of our entryway. And, since then, the state of the property has been in decline. But more upsetting is the loss of our community. I mean, we have people who've lived there for like 40 years. And I lived there for 11 years. I get to know all my neighbors, and I mean, it's just, once we got sold, bought by this mega landlord, we all just felt a sense of despair and hopelessness that we weren't going to be able to afford to rent anymore, because it's one of the few affordable places in New Haven. So then, I guess a couple months later, I was talking to my neighbor Sarah, and she had brought up the idea of a fence. I had never heard of that. So she pointed me to the article about the Quinnipiac Gardens. And for the first time in months, I actually had some hope about being able to still afford my rent. So I guess I'm testifying in support of this legislation, and I hope that this will put us in the right direction. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here and giving us your time, and also thank you to the Quinnipiac Gardens Center Union for giving me some hope in some very dark times that I felt. Yeah. Have a lovely evening.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Thank you for sharing your experience and testimony. So that's the end of our list. So I will ask if there are any other members of the public who may not have signed up in advance, but who wish to be heard on this item. Go ahead and give us your name and address for the record, and then once you begin, you'll have 4 minutes.
Great.
You can pick that up. It's
Nathaniel Rosenberg. I live in 338 Orange Street. First, thank you for having me here tonight. So I'm both myself a renter in New Haven and an organizer with Central Democratic Socialists America. I want to bring some regional context to this ordinance. So I've spent the past several months knocking on doors, holding meetings, talking to residents across our neighboring counties in support of a very similar resolution to protect tenants' rights to organize and tenancy. And we were able to get one passed there in late May, early June, and have been able to see progress among tenant organizing and just collective interest and engagement of the town there in response to that resolution. It's been a tremendously powerful experience to talk about what it could look like if our cities had strong tenant unions and strong protections for people who live here, even if they can't afford a down payment on a home that's one that can pay. And that was a really, really big win. And so it's very exciting to have the opportunity to visit New Haven, because I think with the tenant unions that have been formed here, and the amount of this city that's been able to renters, how big of affordable housing crisis we are facing. And this is one of the many steps the board can take to stopping that crisis and to creating a better New Haven, to be honest. So I urge you to strongly vote in favor of this ordinance and to allow us to recognize tenants unions in New Haven and make the own city the city it should be. Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming down. I see all of us on this question.
I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming to the meeting. I'm not sure if you can answer this, or perhaps the other members of the public can answer. I brought up the issue of how tenants union is formed with the city staff, and the city staff said, well, we're not involved in certifying that or anything like that. So I'm wondering, how does it work? Is it just like a majority on a petition that maybe that's been kind of properly formatted, or is there an actual box you stick your ballot into? I probably should know this, but I can't recall how it's actually established that the majority of people want to have.
Yeah, sure. So I don't think I can fully answer that question for all the places here tonight. I know that the Kennedy ordinance was allowing the Fair Rent Commission there to specifically look at complaints collectively and still rule on them individually, but say that this is a collective problem, we're hearing all these complaints instead of 100 at a time. I think to that other point,
just find other people who are able to answer that.
Perhaps our city staff might also have. You can approach, sure. Just, you'll have to give your name and address for the record once more. I haven't seen it again, but-
Okay, my name is Jennifer Palma and my address is 39 Farm Avenue. And so how we organized our meeting was that we just had a petition and we went around and got as many signatures as we could. And, you know, the one thing about the legislation that is a little bit concerning is that I don't know, I mean, it's important to have a majority, I guess, but just for like legal stuff, but at the same time, I think that some people didn't feel comfortable signing, like even if they wanted to, they didn't feel like they were in a place where they wanted to risk their home, you know, in fear of retaliation or something like that. So that was the only like wording on the legislation I was a little bit concerned about. But yeah, I think we just did a petition and there's not much rules or explanation in the state law about tenant unions, so it's really loose as far as, you know, what constitutes tenant union, how many people, it doesn't say anything like that.
Does that clear it up a little bit for you?
It does.
Great.
I'm grateful for that whole thing.
Alderman.
So my question kind of to the older attorney before.
And who is this a question for?
I guess it's for the city. Is that?
Yes, well, let me just see if I know if the public wants to testify. We'll bring it.
Okay, all right.
So is there anyone else from the public who's not yet testified who wishes to be heard on this item? A second time, any other members of the public who wish to be heard on this item? A third time, any other members of the public who have not yet testified who wish to be heard? I don't see anyone, so I would invite Corporate Counsel King and Director Bermudez to rejoin us. Welcome back. Please reintroduce yourselves with name and address, and all the more to the best.
Please, Bermudez, 121 Lexington Ave, apartment number 11, New Haven.
And Patricia King, 32 Vista Terrace.
Thank you. So my question is, what in a sense certifies a union, like a tennis union? I can live in a complex right now and a couple of things go on, I don't like it. I can write down everybody, at least 10 household names on the back of a notebook pad and say, this is a tennis union and give it to you as a city. Is that acceptable?
No, that was.
Is there a form? Is there, because I think that's the piece that's missing here. Because if I were to read about this and I would think, oh, they gotta have a tennis union, so anywhere I go, I can just say I got a tennis union going on and no one signed anything. I just wrote down their like I live in a condo complex, but if it wasn't, the Cape Man tennis union and that's it.
No, yeah, so it would require 51% of the people within that complex to be members of the tenants union. And so, say your question would, you know, somebody showing up with a list of names suffice, you know, that would not suffice. We're actually creating a form, a standardized form, to make sure that we're able to verify, okay, so who is actually part of that tenants union and providing us with their information, and we're collecting that data. So we're actually in the process of creating that form as we speak.
And also, I would like to add that the definition provides that the members have to be lessees. In other words, people who are on the lease and have a contractual relationship with the landlord. It's not just everybody who lives. It's the people on the lease.
And I wanted to mention in reference to those folks who, I think one of the tenants, Jennifer the Palma, may have brought this up, that she was concerned about retaliation if somebody joined the tenants union. So that's something that we mentioned as part of, the whereas clauses in this amendment, and because of state statutes, it's technically, you do have defense against retaliatory action if you are a member of a tenants union, and that's something that we restate in this amendment so that people recognize that just because, you join a tenants union doesn't mean that all of a sudden now the landlord can retaliate against you.
And so just a little clarity around my question, because I'm the president of a condo association, so for me, you're a homeowner, you're a part of it, regardless if you want to be or not, you're a part of the association. So looking at this, like the tenants that live in apartments, I guess I know that you're developing a form, and what if the issue happens before the form is completed? You see what I mean? If I live in a complex and I have an issue and I want to organize me and the rest of the tenants, but we don't have this form, we haven't filled out this form, but we're a collective body. How do you go forward? Because something like this, I could see getting real messy with everybody saying that they're a tenants union, and then you saying, well, you're a tenants union, but you're not. And because you got the form and you didn't, well, we all got an issue. So I'm just trying to get a little more clarity with regards to the blueprint.
So I want to re-stress one part of it, which is that we still have to see the complaints individually. So whatever happens within your particular unit, we still have to receive your individual complaint. And so if during that interim process that, let's say you're organizing with your neighbors and you're trying to come up with a tenants union, but you still have your own complaint within your unit and your neighbor still has their own complaint, we are still saying, please fill out the regular complaint form as an individual. And so during that process, if as you're coming together as a collective tenants union membership, and then you realize, you know what, all of us have consensus here that something is happening in one of our common areas. And you all recognize that, and then that part of the process would then prompt you to say, okay, we wanna make sure that we are recognized within the Fair Rent Commission. And so that's where the form would be filled out. But we want to stress the part of, it's really important that we receive individual complaints. And the reason being is that if this were ever to be, let's say, appealed in housing court, the cases have to be handled individually because we're legally bounded to that. And furthermore, what might be occurring in one unit, in your unit, might not necessarily be the same problem of unsafe and unhealthy condition that might be occurring in another one. I don't know, did that help?
Oh, no, that helps. That helps. I just have one last follow-up to that. What if I live in one of these complexes that's really big and people just go to work, come home, people don't really talk to one another, but you got all these people in this complex having these issues, but no one's talking to one another. So how would I know that I'm one of 20 people with kind of like the similar issue to even think about, well, let's form a tenants union so we can be powerful in numbers. Does that make sense?
So the Fair Rent Commission has the ability, we have the power of the investigatory power. And so if we're seeing a pattern, let's say we have 50 cases within the same complex, then that's a red flag for us. We can't, however, say to all of those individual folks who are living in those individual apartments, hey, you should form a tenants union because the onus is on them. But for us, it is definitely a red flag. And so we will treat it as such, and we will definitely be bringing it up before the Board of Commissioners, especially during the public hearing, where we're seeing a conglomerate of problems existing within the same complex.
But it's still, but it still doesn't get me to the rest of the people that are having an issue, so we can come together to create the solution. And I guess that's really my point. How is this communication happening in order for this step to take place? I got you with the form, which is short. But if I think I'm the only one that's having a problem, or maybe just my neighbor, we're only 2 people and the rule says 10. And so I just wanted to try to get clear with that. But it sounds like a really good thing. I just want people to be able to understand the process, because so often, and through legislation, we do all these things, but at the same time, we're really not giving people direction on how to do the things that we do. And so I didn't see it here. And so I don't know if you could put it somewhere in here, but I just wanted to say that for the record and for my own understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. I think these are questions that every labor organizer has to ask themselves. Of, how do you bring collective action together? I think my read on, so just if I may tend to summarize, I think part of that conversation. So what this would not do would be to take away or modify any individual's right to an individualized complaint or process at the Fair Rent Commission. What it does do is it adds an additional venue or avenue, if you will, for collective action. And it's collective action with a little more heft than just, folks trying to, on their own, just sort of submit identical complaints, something like that. Is that accurate?
Yes, this really gives the Fair Rent Commission another tool. It is to conduct its investigations. That the unions, tenants unions would be filing a request for investigation. And that would be what is pursued through the process that is started by the tenants union. It's an investigation into the conditions at the property. And findings could be made after that. Now, it is our hope that during this process, having the tenants unions having started this would be an incentive for the landlords then to resolve some of these issues. So we're hoping that could be done prior to the commission actually having to make any findings per se. So the idea would be to allow for some, education about what the problems are, the landlords an opportunity to try to resolve them. And we're hopeful that we could then use this mechanism to improve conditions for everybody, and that people wouldn't necessarily have to file an individual complaint, although they certainly, this doesn't take away from that complaint process, but it adds an investigatory asset that we really didn't have before the unions. I don't really see a role for the city in sort of getting involved in starting tenants unions, or there may be people who have organized these who might be able to be referral sources for someone who contacts their rent and says, "Hey, I want to form a tenants union, who can I contact?" We might be able to give them some resources in the community for that. But I don't really see, I don't frankly think it would be appropriate for the city to sort of take an active role in that, because the commission in the end has to be an impartial adjudicator of complaints and issues. That's probably the way I would see it. And, we certainly appreciate, obviously, the affordability crisis in the city and everywhere else for people who are having a hard time paying their rent and the high cost of living and housing. Unfortunately, we kind of have to work within the structure that we have. And, there may be things because we rely on the labeling statutes. There may be also things that could be done at the state level. That could expand the abilities of federal commissions everywhere in the state to take on more, to have a little bit more, to have a little bit more of an ability.
Great, thank you for that explanation. That's
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming back and answer our questions. I appreciate your powerful answers to my colleagues' questions. the issue I was trying to understand is, you know, what's involved in the registration process. I think that's the purpose, which is to certify or otherwise establish that people representing themselves at the Fair Commission on the authorized representatives of, you know, do the established tenants, and not just somebody who decides to show up and start yelling. So then I gather that the registration process is that the city, whether it's the Fair Rent Commission or the LCI or some other agency in the city, would receive the petition or copy of it, see that it's in good order, that all the attestations that are on the form are probably filled out and dated, whatever else, notarized, I don't know if you're planning to do that. And then that form will also indicate or attached to that form the indication of the authorized representative. And that's pretty much what we'll need to, like, create this registry of authorized representatives, whichever we come to.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it. Correct.
Great. Thank. Okay. All right, well, that's all the questions I got. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Sean. Any other questions for city staff while we've got them? Seeing none, I will thank you a second time or a third time or thank you. And at this point, I will entertain any motions.
Mr. Chair, I move we close the public hearing portion of this meeting.
Second.
There's been a motion, it's been seconded, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? The public portion of this meeting is closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more motions?
I'm ready to move item 2. Seems like we're ready to do
that.
Second.
Item 2 has been moved and seconded. Discussion on item 2, Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to speak in favor of this item. In many ways, it's the city's response to what's happening in the community. Right, there are people who are organizing, creating these new entities, and I think it's really helpful for the city to say, okay, how can these new entities interact with city agencies in ways that are appropriate and legal? I'm very sympathetic to comments by some of the members of the public about wanting to create definitions that would be as inclusive as possible. I think at this stage, I'm not prepared to offer an amendment that would do that, because I feel at this point, we probably ought to go with what we got, see how it works, and then revisit it within a year or two, in terms of whether or not we want to lower the threshold from 10 units to 8, 4, 6, to whatever, and look at other ways to possibly expand eligibility to speak before the commission. But at this point, it seems like a really good place to start, and we should move in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman. Further discussion on item 2, Alderman Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too stand in support of this ordinance. I love the fact that community wants to take things into their own hands and organize to make sure that they have a positive, living situation, and not be taken advantage of through landlords as testified on tonight. I would like to, I don't know if this is what you call or friendly, following up on my colleague from the 25th Ward, what you just said in regards to maybe we can add something like to have the commission come back in a year or maybe 2 years to let us know where we really are with this organizing, so we can really see it. Because as testified by the city today, the last time this ordinance was looked at was in the 70s. And, you know, we really want to do things that's really going to help people and see that we're moving in the right direction versus just doing it and it's just there. And it's really not helping anyone. So if we can look at putting somewhere in there that forces, even though as alders, we can call people back all the time, but when you put it on the radar like that, it forces them to really look at the structure and to make sure that it's really working for the people.
Yeah, so would you, are you moving an amendment, or would you like to try to figure it out before a second reading, or what? How would you like to proceed?
So I'll talk to the city to see, I guess if that's a way to go about that, to, you know, if they can just add that in somehow, to come back to the table to give us that update, or, you know, around how this is actually working for the people.
Okay, so just to clarify, it's not a motion at this time, but you're saying you may.
Right.
Understood.
Okay, but I am in support of your.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you. Further discussion. I would just quickly add, I am in favor of this as well. This board has taken a number of actions over the past year or two on the affordable housing crisis, and you know it's chipping away at a massive problem, and it's going to take all sorts of actions beyond just this to continue to make progress. But a lot of our focus as the board has been in trying to pass policies that encourage the creation of more affordable housing. And as we're doing that, which is important, we can't forget that we also need to make sure that the housing, the affordable housing, or even the quote unquote affordable housing that already exists is safe, is sanitary, is actually livable. And I think that a policy like this, which gives another path or venue for collective action, so that tenants can start to have a little bit more of a fair fight and taking on, some of these issues themselves, I think is really worth doing. I think the Fair Rent Commission is a body that actually has quite a bit of power. I'm quite excited, to see that body begin to really start to flex its muscle. And so I would be in favor of this as well. Any other discussion, further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of item 2 say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 2 carries. Any further motions?
Mr. Chair, I am prepared to make a motion on item 1, but I don't know if colleagues are quite ready to vote on that this evening. Because if not, then I won't.
I'm iffy on it. I hear some gruff. My as the chair of the committee, I think that this is a really important policy because I know it's one of these pure constituent service things, and I know that several colleagues have raised this issue of truck parking. But I think it's quite a list of work to do, and I personally would like to take more time on it. But if any always want to try to get through that ticket right now, we could try.
I'm happy to be part of whatever follow-up effort seems appropriate coming out of this meeting, going into whenever this item would come before this committee again, because it's an ordinance amendment, it really needs a committee recommendation and the first and second reading. And so whether that's September or October, whatever the case may be, I just want to volunteer my participation in helping the next step.
So noted. So any other motions? On the umbrella.
Mr. Chair, I move to adjourn.
Second.
There's been a motion to adjourn, seconded discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, colleagues.
Um,